We continue now at the top of Daf Tzadi Hey Amar Aleph and Meseches Bava Metzia. This is Bava Metzia Daf 95a. And the previous summer, the Gemara wanted to know the source that a shoel is obligated. Let's say the shoel has borrowed an animal and it gets captured. How do we know the shoel is obligated to pay for that? We know that the shoel is obligated to pay if the animal is injured or dies. That it says in the pasuk. We don't have a source if the animal is captured that the shoel is obligated to pay. And the Gemara answers it's like Rav Nosson says. Rav Nosson says that there's an extra word in the pasuk. It says or. It says the animal is injured or it dies. It doesn't need to say the word o. It doesn't need to say or. And that includes, let's say, the animal is captured. And the Gemara now is in the middle of bringing a brisa. In the brisa, we have a machlokas between Rabbi Yoshia and Rabbi Yonasan, whether in the pasuk which talks about the prohibition of cursing one's father and mother, according to Rabbi Yonasan, automatically we understand that it means you're cursing the father or the mother. That's automatic. So according to Rabbi Yonasan, everything we said before makes sense because the word or in the pasuk by shoel is extra. You don't need it to say it. It's automatically implied. But Rabbi Yoshia says that's not the case. Rabbi Yoshia actually has to have a limud to say that it means the father or the mother, or else you would have thought it means that you have to curse both your father and your mother. And the brisa now is in the middle of Rabbi Yonasan. Rabbi Yonasan says again, automatically we would understand that it's either or, ad sheyifrot lachakasav yachtav, unless the pasuk says yachtav together. If the pasuk says it means it together, it means it together. Otherwise, we understand that to mean either or. And Rashi explains that Yifrod Locha Kasav Yachtav, the pasuk has to say together, otherwise we understand that it means either or. Kemosha parted Locha Kasav Bechorish Shor V'Chamor, like we find when it talks about plowing with an ox and a donkey together, which is an issue of Kilayim. So there, Dmidi Itzrich Lemichtav Yachtav, there it does need to say together. Shamin on the Ilo Kasvei, we understand that if it doesn't say that, have a mashma shalo Yachrosh Lo B'Shor V'Lo B'Chamor, then it would have implied that you can't plow it all with an ox, you can't plow it all with a donkey. But since it says it means you can't plow with them together. Now, according to Rabbi Yonasan, you have an extra pasuk because he automatically understands it means either or. So what does he do with the extra pasuk of Aviv v'imo kilel? He uses that in Sanhedrin lahavias hamakala la'achar misa. That comes to include even somebody who curses after death. In any case, so the Gemara is saying the answer we're giving, that we're learning it from the word o, that works according to Rabbi Yonasan because that word is indeed extra. But according to Rabbi Yoshia, does that work according to Rabbi Yoshia? And the Gemara says, afilu temer Rabbi Yoshia. You can even say that it follows Rabbi Yoshia, even though Rabbi Yoshia, by the cursing of one's father and mother, he says over there that it's not automatically implied that it means either or. But here, l'chalek hachalot sarach, here, you don't actually need the word o to divide. It is obvious that it means either or, even without the word o. My time, what's the reason? Svaru, because it's logical. Mali katla kula, mali katla palga. What's the difference if you kill the whole animal? What's the difference if you kill part of the animal? What that means to say is that injuring the animal is a step towards death, so to speak. Rashi explains, Svarahu, it's logical. The nishbar below mace, it makes sense to say that, let's say the animal is injured, it breaks a leg, but it doesn't die. It's logical to say nami mechayiv. It's logical to say you'd be chayiv there. To have a like katla palga, because that's like killing it halfway. So since it's logical, you don't actually even need the word o. The word o is extra, even according to Rabbi Yoshi. And again, that can serve as the source for, let's say you have a situation where the animal is captured. And the Gemara continues, Geneva v'aveda b'shoel minol. And where do we know Geneva v'aveda by a borrower? How do we know a borrower is responsible for that? V'chitem, if you're going to say nelef mishvura umesa, we should learn it out from shvura umesa, meaning to say if you're responsible for the animal getting injured or dying, certainly you'd be responsible if it's stolen or lost. But malish shvura umesa delo efshar lemitrach v'asuye. When it comes to the animal being injured or dies, so there's nothing that you can do to actually bring the animal back. Tomar b'gneva v'aveda, whereas when it comes to an animal that's stolen or lost, the avshar lemitrach veisuye, there it's already possible to make the effort and bring the animal back. So maybe in such a situation, the shoel would actually not be responsible because the owner is able to do that. As Rashi says, Tomar b'gneva v'aveda, the avshar lemitrach veisuye, it's possible to make the effort and get it, vehicle a memar. So then you can say, yachzor be'oleh achared, that the owner should be the one to pursue the animal. Ulai timase, maybe they'll be able to find the animal. And so therefore there is a reason to say that maybe a shoel logically should not be responsible for gneva v'aveda. So what is the source that the shoel is responsible for Gneva v'Aveda? And so the Gemara says, Ela ki hadatanya, rather, it's like what was taught in the following brisa. So the pasuk says, V'nishbar omes. Again, it gets injured, it breaks a leg, or it dies. Ainli ela shvura umesa. I only know that the shoel is responsible for shvura umesa. Let's say the animal is injured or dies. Gneva v'Aveda minai. And how do we know that the shoel is responsible for Gneva v'Aveda if it's stolen or lost? And so the brisa says, Amrit kal v'chomer, we have the following, kal v'chomer, umashomer sachar shepater mishvura umesa. If by a shomer sachar, which is exempt from shvura umesa, chayav b'gneva v'Aveda, but a shomer sachar, even though he has less responsibility than a shoel, he is still responsible if it's stolen or lost. So shoel shechayev b'shvuro meisa, shoel that is chayev if the animal is injured or dies, eino din shechayev b'gneva v'yaveda. Certainly it should be true that he is obligated if the animal is stolen or lost. And the Brisa concludes, v'zeu kal v'chomer she'eino lav teshuva. This is a kal v'chomer which there is no refutation for. And the Gemara says, my eino lav teshuva. What do you mean that there's no refutation for it? That implies that there is some theoretical refutation that just is not a good refutation. What it means is as follows. Maybe you'll say that you can refute this kal v'chomer and say as follows. When it comes to a shomer sacher, if a shomer sacher would claim that it was stolen, so obviously the shomer sacher is responsible. But if the shomer sacher claims it was stolen by armed robbers, that's considered to be at the level of ones. The shomer sacher is not responsible, and it's considered to be toin tainas ganav. And if it turns out that the shomer sacher is the true ganav, he'll pay kefil. So you'll say that that's true by a shomer sacher, which is not true by a shoel, because a shoel is responsible even if it's stolen by armed robbers. And so therefore you'll say maybe a shomer sacher actually does have somewhat of a higher responsibility than a shoel, because it's possible for the shomer sacher to pay kefil. That's not possible when it comes to the shoel. So afilu hachi, that's not a good refutation, because nevertheless, karna de shoel adifa, as we mentioned in the previous summit, the fact that the shoel has to pay the keren, the fact that if he says it was taken by armed robbers, he's immediately responsible to pay the principal, that's considered to be more severe, that's considered a higher level of responsibility. And so again, the kal v'chomer works. If the shomer sacher is responsible for geneva v'yaveda, certainly the shoel will be responsible for geneva v'yaveda. And the Gemara continues, if you want, I could say another answer why this is not a refutation of the kal v'chomer, because this Tana holds listim mizui and gazlan, who that armed robbers are considered a gazlan and not a ganav. And the idea is that by a shomer sacher also there is no kefil, because if a shomer sacher claims that it was taken by listim mizui, and that is not toin tainas ganav, rather that is toin tainas gazlan, and there's no kefil by toin tainas gazlan, and so therefore there would be no refutation for the kal v'chomer. And again, we would make the kal v'chomer that if a shomer sacher is responsible for geneva v'yaveda, certainly a shoel is going to be responsible for geneva v'yaveda. And the Gemara continues, Eshkachon et l'chiv. Now we find that this is true when it comes for obligation, but liftor minolan, how do we know that it's true when it comes to for exemption? Rashi here explains, Eshkachon l'chiv, meaning geneva v'yaveda b'shoel, l'chayev b'she'ein ba'olavima. We have this kal v'chomer to say that a shoel is chayev for geneva v'yaveda. Let's say the owner is not working together with the shoel. However, liftor minolan. But where do we know that the shoel would be exempt from a geneva v'yaveda if the owner is working? Shem ba'olavima pater. That if the owner is working with the shoel and there's a geneva v'yaveda, how do we know pater over there? Because that is not in the pasuk. And the Gemara says, V'chitema neilef mishvuru umesa. Now maybe you'll say we should learn it out from shvuru umesa. We'll say just like if it's injured or it dies and the owner is working with the shoel is exempt. The same is true when it comes to geneva v'yaveda. But ma'ala shvuru umesa shekein onus. Maybe by shvuru umesa that makes sense that he's pater, because that's already an onus. It's an accident, so he's not responsible to that level of responsibility. But when it comes to geneva v'yaveda, maybe the shoel is responsible even if the owner is working with him. And so the Gemara says, Ela gomer mishomer sacher. Rather, you have to say, we learn it from shomer sacher, as Rashi explains, gomer mishomer sacher, ma shomer sacher bebailim pater. Just like a shomer sacher has this exemption, that if he's working with the owner, he's pater, begneva v'yaveda, and that's a p'tur from gneva v'yaveda. Af shoel bebailim pater. So to a shoel is going to be pater if he's working together with the bailim. And the Gemara continues, V'shomer sacher gufim minolim. Well, where do we learn shomer sacher itself? How do we know this idea that the shomer sacher is exempt? And the answer to that is Gamri chiyuva de shomer sacher mi chiyuva de shoel. We learn the obligations of a shomer sacher from the general obligations of a shoel. Malahalan bebailim pater, just like over there by a shoel, if he's working with the owners, there's an exemption. Afkan bebailim pater. So too when it comes to a shomer sacher, if he's working with the owners, so then there is an exemption. And the Gemara says, "B'mai gomer." Well, how do you learn shomer sacher from shoel in this regard? Iba memotzino. Now, if you're learning it from a memotzino, you're basically saying if we find that it's true by shoel, it should be true by shomer sacher as well. So ika lemifrach kidavarachinon. Then you can ask the same question we already asked to shekein ones, because again, you're back to our original question. By a shoel, we're talking about accidents. We're saying that if the owner is working together with the shoel and there's an accident, then the pasuk says that he's exempt. So how do you know to say that that's true when it comes to Geneva v'Aveda as well? So we still don't really have a source that this is true by shomer sacher. And so the Gemara says, Ela amar kra, rather you have to say, the pasuk says, V'chi yeshal, it says, let's say a person, talking about a situation of a person borrowing borrowing, and it has a vav, and we understand that to mean vav mosef al inyan rishon. The vav, it's like adding on to what the topic before was. V'yilmod elyon mitachton, we learn out what was discussed above from what was below, and therefore through that kind of limud we say that the exact same law of ba'alav imo that applies by a shoel applies by a shomer sacher as well. But the Gemara still says, even if you're going to say that we learn out the concept of ba'alav imo by shomer sacher from this vav, we learn out from shoel to shomer sacher in this regard, v'yakati, but still shoel mishomer sacher lo gomer, you can't learn shoel back from shomer sacher, meaning to say you can't learn that a shoel also is exempt by gneva v'aveda just because that's true by shomer sacher. The ikol mifrach, because you can refute it as follows: ma'ala shomer sacher shekain pater b'shvuro mesa. A shomer sacher in general has a lower level of responsibility because he's exempt if the animal is injured or dies. Tomer b'shoel shechayeh b'shvuro mesa, whereas by a shoel, by a borrower, he has to pay. Let's say it's injured or it dies, so you still can't learn back in the other direction. So ela geneva v'aveda b'shoel l'chiyuva minolan. So rather, the Gemara says, where do we know that geneva v'aveda by a shoel? How do we know in general that a shoel is chayiv for geneva v'aveda? The gomer mishomer sacher. The whole idea is we learned that out from shomer sacher, and then we apply the rule of daya, which means when you make a kal v'chomer from one case to another, you can't go beyond the source case. Dayo lavo min adin lios kanidon. It's enough to learn. If you're learning from the source, you can't go beyond the source. Magneva v'aveda the shomer sacher b'bailim pater, just like the geneva v'aveda by shomer sacher. If the shomer sacher is working with the owners, then we say pater. Af geneva v'aveda the shoel, so too by the geneva v'aveda the shoel nami, by the geneva v'aveda of the shoel as well, b'bailim pater. We're going to say that if he's working with the owners as pater, that's how we know that this exemption of ba'alav imo applies by shoel, even by geneva v'aveda. But the Gemara continues, Hanichalaman de islay dayo. Now that works according to the one who applies the rule of dayo to a kal v'chomer. If you limit a kal v'chomer and say that you can't go beyond the source case, it makes sense. Elalaman de leslay dayo ma'ikol amemer. But according to the one who does not hold of dayo, what are we going to say? Again, how are we going to learn the exemption of ba'alav imo by geneva v'aveda by shoel? And so the Gemara says, Elamar Kra, rather it's because the pasuk says, similar to what we said above, V'chiyishal, it says V'chiyishal with a vav, vav mosef al inyan rishon. Again, the vav adds on to what we were talking about above. V'yilmud elyon mitachton v'tachton mi'elyon. We learn in both directions. We learn the case before from the case below, and the case below from the case above. Meaning to say we learn in both directions as follows. Just like by shoel we find this concept of ba'alav imo, that it's an exemption, we apply that by shomer sacher. And just like by shomer sacher, we have this application of ba'alav imo when it comes to geneva v'aveda, we apply that to shoel as well. We essentially apply the vav in both directions. And Rashi explains, Laman de les le dayo. What about according to the one who doesn't hold of dayo? That's Rabbi Tarfon b'Perakeitzar b'Bava Kama. That's Rabbi Tarfon in Bava Kama. V'yilmed elyon mitachton v'tachton me'elyon. You learn in both directions means as follows: Geneva v'aveda the shomer sacher michiyuv the shoel. Geneva v'aveda by shomer sacher we learn from shoel. Mashvuru umesa the shoel b'bailim pater. Just like if it's injured or dies by a shoel, we say if he's with the bailim it's pater. Af chiyuv the shomer sacher b'bailim pater. So too when a shomer sacher is chayiv, let's say a shomer sacher is chayiv in geneva v'aveda, it's going to be pater if he's working with the bailim. And then the other direction as well, v'tachton me'elyon, the lower case from the upper case, meaning to say we're going to learn the case of shoel from the case of shomer sacher. Ma shomer sacher chayiv b'geneva v'aveda shelo b'bailim, just like a shomer sacher is chayiv in geneva v'aveda if the owners are not there. Av shoel kain, so too by a shoel, uma shomer sacher b'bailim pater, and just like by a shomer sacher with the owners is pater by geneva v'aveda. Av shoel kain, the same is true by shoel. Ve'ein meshivan ala hekesh, you're not able to refute. You can't ask questions on such a hekesh, on such a kind of comparison. And the Gemara continues, Itmar, it was stated the following, Machlokas amoroim, pshia bebailim. Let's say you have negligence with the owner, meaning the shomer is working together with the owner, and the shomer was negligent. Do you have that exemption of ba'alav imo when it comes to negligence? Pligi bar Ravacha v'Ravina, that's a machlokas between Ravacha and Ravina. Chad amar chayev, chad amar pater. One says chayev and one says pater. And the Gemara explains, Manda amar chayev, the one who says that you're chayev, meaning to say the one who says there is no exemption of ba'alav imo by negligence, kasavar, he holds mikra nidrash lefanav v'lo lifnei panav. We darshan a pasuk to the parsha before, but not to the parsha before that. Meaning to say, ba'alav imo is written by shoel. The parsha right before shoel is shomer sacher. We can apply ba'alav imo to the parsha right before to shomer sacher because of the vav, but you can't go back two parshios and apply ba'alav imo to shomer chinam. Hilkach, therefore, in ba'alav imo, when it says the pasuk in ba'alav imo that you have this exemption if you're working with the the owner, as shomer chinam lo ksiv, and that's not written by shomer chinam. You can't say that ba'al avimo applies by shomer chinam. And furthermore, upshia nami, when it comes to negligence, b'shomer sachar v'shoel lo ksiv, it doesn't actually mention that a shomer sachar and a shoel is chayiv for negligence in the pasuk. Hilkach, therefore, b'shomer sachar v'shoel lechiyav. How do we know that a shomer sachar and a shoel are chayiv when it comes to negligence? That's asya b'kal v'chomer mi-shomer chinam. That comes from a kal v'chomer from shomer chinam. Meaning, if a shomer chinam is chayiv in negligence, certainly a shomer sachar and a shoel should be chayiv in negligence. It's not because it's written in any pasuk. Avol bebailim lifter, but when it comes to the fact that you have an exemption when you're working with the owners, af b'shomer sachar v'shoel lo. When it comes to shomer sachar and shoel, just like shomer chinam, they're not going to get the exemption of ba'al avimo. My time, and what's the reason? Kiksiv in ba'al avimo lo yishalem, because when is it written in ba'al avimo lo yishalem? As shoel v'ashomer sachar, it's only written by shoel and shomer sachar using the vav, and ahana chiyuv v'dichsiv behu behed yehu demichtav. It's only going on those things or those obligations that are written in the pasuk over there. So already written in the pasuk, we can talk about geneva, v'aveda, and onus, and say there's an exemption of ba'al avimo. But you can't apply the exemption of ba'al avimo to negligence. You certainly can't apply it by shomer chinam, and you can't apply it by negligence by shomer sachar and shoel as well. And manda amar potter. Now the one who says that ba'al avimo by negligence is considered an exemption, and it's potter, kasav ar mikra nidrish lafanav vilifnei panav. That manda amar holds that we can darshan the pasuk of ba'al avimo going to the parsha beforehand. We can apply it to shomer sachar. That's the parsha right before shoel, and we can also apply it to the parsha before that. We can apply it to the parsha of shomer chinam as well, and therefore we apply ba'al avimo to shomer chinam. V'chi ksiv in ba'al avimo as shomer chinam nami ksiv. When it says ba'al avimo, it's going on shomer chinam as well, and therefore it does apply to negligence. And the Gemara continues, Tanan, we learned in our Mishnah, Hashoel hapara v'shoel ba'al imo, if a person borrows a cow and borrows the services of the owner with it. Hashoel hapara v'sachar ba'al imo, if a person borrows a cow and hires the owner with it. Shoel ba'al o sachar, and let's say the person borrows the services of the owner or hires the owner first. V'achar kach shoel hapara, and then he borrows the cow. V'meis, and the cow dies. In all of these cases, potter, we say that the shoel is exempt because you have ba'al of imo. And so the Gemara tries to bring a proof now to the question above. V'ilu shomer chinam lo katani. It doesn't say anything about shomer chinam in this Mishnah. That implies that ba'al of imo does not apply to shomer chinam. The Gemara says, "V'lataymech." Well, according to your reasoning, if that's a good question from the Mishnah, shomer sachar mi katani. Does it say shomer sachar in the Mishnah? It doesn't say shomer sachar, but we're saying that the exemption of ba'al of imo does apply to shomer sachar. Rather, you have to say tana milsa, that the Mishnah is only bringing matters, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Tzadi Hey Amud Beis.